The first time Kale Ardent saw her, the entire station seemed to shrink. He had faced Leviathan traders who could swallow a humanoid whole, crystalline sages whose words shattered glassware, and mercenaries who thought silence was sharper than a blade. He was used to danger wrapped in protocol, used to fear dressed in formality. But he was not ready for the silence that followed her steps. Concordia Nexus, the crossroad of 1,000 worlds, had never been quiet. Its vaulted atriums were alive with voices, bargains, laughter, threats, prayers, all colliding in a tide of overlapping dialects. The smell of alien spices mixed with the ozone of graviton engines. Neon banners blinked in a dozen languages, competing for attention. But when she arrived, the air itself seemed to surrender. Empress Lyra Draxon of the Obsidian Dominion, feared across the quadrant as the Grey Sovereign, strode into the hall. Traders froze mid-step. The soft hum of the engines dulled as though the machinery itself dared not intrude. Even the neon banners seemed hesitant to flicker. She entered like a storm forced into the shape of a woman. Lyra stood 3 times Kale's height, her skin a pale shade of grey veined faintly with silver, like moonlight etched into flesh. Her armor, forged from blackened bronze, clung to her form, both statue and weapon. A crimson cloak, embroidered with the sigils of conquered systems, billowed with her movements. Her hair, a cascade of deep red, burned under the artificial lights like rivers of fire spilling over her shoulders. But her eyes, those molten amber suns, held a weight no crown could carry. Her guards, clad in obsidian plating, advanced with her, weapons thrumming with power. Courtiers followed, whispering with the oily devotion of sycophants. And the crowd parted in waves, pressing themselves against the walls. All except Kale. He sat at a negotiation table with 3 rival guild envoys when she entered, but unlike the others, he did not lower his gaze. Everyone else bowed their heads. Kale simply stared, not in challenge, not in defiance, but because he had never seen anything like her. His mind, trained to read alien physiologies and catalog their nuances, caught on the perfection of her markings, the scale of her presence, the artistry of her form. His gaze lingered too long. And when her eyes found his, the chamber collapsed inward on that single connection. Kale felt it press against his chest, as though gravity itself had grown heavier. His Aven partner, Saran Tavan, whispered a prayer that sounded more like a farewell. The Empress strode closer. Her voice cut through the stillness, velvet wrapped around thunder. "You dare look upon me?" Gasps rippled across the hall. Guards shifted. The guild envoys shrank. Kale's mouth was dry, but words came anyway, reckless, blunt, unshaken. "Yes," he said. "Because you're beautiful." The word rang through the air like a blade. Her amber eyes narrowed. She stopped a few paces away, towering so far above him that his head barely reached her hip. Her shadow fell across him like a living eclipse. Execution was the only reasonable outcome. No one spoke to the Grey Sovereign that way. But Kale did not flinch. His gaze held hers, not arrogant, not rebellious, only steady. Her lips parted. The court braced for his death. But her voice came softer than expected. "Beautiful," she repeated, tasting the alien word as though it might poison her tongue. "No one has called me that in 100 years. The courtiers froze. The guards tightened their grips. The air itself seemed to still. Kale almost smiled. Then they'd been blind. Gasps erupted. One envoy dropped to his knees, another turned away muttering. Saran groaned low in his throat. Lyra leaned down, her enormous frame folding like a predator sizing its prey. A massive hand, tipped with bronze talons, reached forward. With the gentlest motion, she tipped his chin upward, forcing him to look into her eyes. "You risk much, human. It isn't a risk to tell the truth." For a flicker of a moment, the most feared empress in the quadrant looked unsettled. Then the spell shattered. A messenger stumbled into the hall, armor scorched, collapsing to one knee. Majesty, urgent transmission. Confederacy fleets have struck 3 colonies. Simultaneous assaults. Communication severed. The chamber erupted in chaos. Generals demanded retaliation, guards called for war. Lyra's presence swelled, her voice a hiss of fury. They dare strike at my dominion while I stand here. The court cried for fleets, for bombardments, for fire. Kale opened his mouth. Against all reason, against all sense, he spoke. That's exactly what they want. The noise surged against him, outrage, disbelief, threats of execution. Guards advanced. But Lyra raised her hand, and the hall fell silent. Her gaze locked on him. Explain. His throat tightened, but he stood. 3 attacks, perfectly timed. They knew you'd be here. They expect you to strike with fury, because that's what you're known for. It's what they've prepared for. If you respond as they predict, you play their game. But if you don't. He drew breath. If you answer with elegance instead of fire, you ruin their plan before it begins. The court erupted again, voices rising in protest. But Lyra did not silence them. She only studied him, her burning eyes unreadable. Finally, she spoke. You speak of elegance, human. Show me. Kale steadied himself. Don't retaliate. Restore. Slip your stealth flotillas past their blockades. Rebuild communications quietly. Make their fleets meaningless. While they wait for war, prove you don't need it. Her eyes narrowed, molten fire flickering in the depths. Then, to the shock of all present, her lips curved, not into cruelty, but into something stranger. You will come with me, she said, voice resonant as thunder. Aboard the Obsidian Colossus. You will explain this elegance. But know this, if your words falter, you will die without ceremony. Kale bowed, the faintest shadow of a smile tugging at his lips. Understood, Majesty. But truth outlives fear. And so the human who dared to call her beautiful was carried into the heart of the Dominion's might, the colossal flagship known as the Obsidian Colossus, a fortress of steel drifting across the stars like a broken world. The Obsidian Colossus was not a ship. It was a continent forged from iron, a cathedral of steel and fire adrift in the void. Its hull glowed with faint rivers of green energy, each vein pulsing like the heartbeat of a colossal beast. Kale Ardent had never seen anything so vast. When he stepped onto the hangar deck, silence swallowed him whole. Rows upon rows of soldiers turned as one, their armor black as obsidian, their eyes narrowing at the sight of him. To them, he was smaller than insignificant, an insect, barely tolerated in the breath of their Empress. Yet they stood rigid, the air vibrating with disciplined menace, as though the very walls breathed devotion to her. Escorted by guards twice his height, Kale was led through corridors wide enough to house entire shuttles. The Colossus was alive with activity, officers at their stations, engineers weaving through streams of tactical data that lit the walls like constellations. Everywhere he walked, suspicion followed. Whispers trailed him. A human so small, daring to walk where even warlords bowed. At last, the guards delivered him to the command spire. The chamber thrummed with light. Holographic maps bloomed above, vast sectors of space flickering into being. Data surged like rivers of stars across the vaulted ceiling. Officers moved with lethal precision, their gestures flowing as if choreographed. And at the heart of it all stood Empress Lyra Draxon. Her crimson cloak spilled across the platform as she turned. The fire of her hair blazed against the dark glow of the projections. Her massive form radiated dominance, her voice cutting through the chamber like thunder. Status. Admiral Rovar, scarred and gravel-voiced, stepped forward. Majesty, 3 colonies struck, Prime Nethra Hub, Arden's Reach, and Vaynar Spire. Infrastructure crippled. Comms severed. Civilian casualties minimal. Kale stepped forward, ignoring the ripple of hostility his audacity earned from the gathered officers. He pointed at the glowing map. "Notice the pattern," he said. "They didn't slaughter civilians. They didn't raze cities. They cut communication. They're isolating your worlds, forcing you into the obvious move, smashing through with overwhelming force." The chamber stiffened. Lyra's molten gaze shifted toward him. "And if I do," she said slowly, "I become predictable. If I do not, I appear weak." Kale's lips curved faintly. "Not if you choose a third path." Gasps stirred. General Thrwn, tusked and towering, stepped forward, his massive form blotting the glow of the map. "This is heresy against doctrine. Dominion fleets strike with fury. To do otherwise is weakness." Lyra ignored him. Her gaze remained locked on Kale. "Speak." Kale traced arcs across the holographic projection. "Send stealth vessels through hidden lanes. Quietly restore the colonies. Rebuild communication beneath their notice. Let their fleets waste themselves guarding blockades that don't matter." Lyra's eyes narrowed. The chamber held its breath. "And while they wait for war," Kale continued, "let the galaxy see you outmaneuver them without a single bombardment. No rivers of blood, no cities burned. Only brilliance. A heavy silence. Generals exchanged wary glances. Some sneered, others scowled, but none dared interrupt." Lyra's lips curved. "Not into kindness, not into cruelty, but into something dangerous. Strength is not only firepower," she said, her voice cold as steel. "It is in the mind that directs it. Remember this." Hours bled away. Together, they worked, a strange duet of insight and power. Kale mapped the psychology of their enemies, pointing out patterns of arrogance, fault lines of fear. Lyra shaped his ideas into sharper edges, weaving them into strategies her generals could not deny. What began as his words and her command grew into something that belonged to them both. At one point, she turned her burning gaze toward him, her voice low. "You called me beautiful. Now you call me brilliant. Tell me, Kale Ardent, what do you see when you look at me? Tyrant, conqueror, or something else?" He met her eyes without hesitation. "I see someone who was trained to rule with chains of fear. But who could build something greater, if she chooses?" Her expression shifted, unreadable. For a heartbeat, the storm in her gaze softened. But before the silence could deepen, alarms flared. A breathless officer stumbled forward. "Majesty, intercepted transmission, traitors within the fleet itself. Loyalists feeding the Confederacy our every move." The chamber froze. Lyra's eyes blazed. "Who?" "Admiral Malvek, Majesty," the officer said grimly. "Your mentor." The weight of the word struck like a hammer. Malvek, the architect of her doctrine, the man who had forged her into a weapon of fear. Betrayal deeper than steel cut through her. Kale stepped closer, voice steady. "That's why he expects you to retaliate. He trained you to answer with fury. If you do, you give him victory." The spire was silent, the Dominion's warlords frozen in disbelief. Lyra stood unmoving, her vast frame trembling with fury that threatened to split the ship itself. Kale's words cut softly through the storm. "Defeat him not with his lessons, Majesty. Show him you've outgrown them." Lyra's lips curved, not into rage, but into something sharp, something alive. A dangerous smile. "Then lightning it shall be." Her voice thundered across the chamber. "Prepare the stealth flotillas. Deploy the relay ships. Restore our colonies. Let our enemies choke on their wasted fleets. The Dominion evolves, or it dies." And the officers, one by one, bowed their heads, not in fear, but in stunned, reluctant awe. The news spread through the Colossus like fire racing along dry grass. Soldiers whispered that the Empress had abandoned the old doctrine, that the Grey Sovereign had chosen elegance over annihilation. Some called it weakness. Others called it madness. But many waited, breath caught in their throats, to see if her will remained law. Cale Ardent walked the endless corridors with suspicion burning into his back. Towering soldiers muttered curses in tongues he didn't know, their eyes filled with contempt. And yet, in the space between glares, he caught something else, curiosity. None could fathom how a human, no taller than their Empress's thigh, dared to walk beside her. Later, in the command spire, Lyra stood before the sprawling holomap, her armored hands pressed against the projection of a starfield. Crimson light painted her gray skin in molten tones, her red hair spilling like fire around her shoulders. "You have changed the course of my dominion, human," she said without turning. Her voice rumbled like distant thunder. Cale hesitated, then stepped closer. "Change is never easy, Majesty. But the galaxy doesn't fear you less for adapting. It fears you more, for being unpredictable." Slowly, she looked down at him. Not as curiosity, not as prey, but as something else. Her eyes narrowed, voice low. "You called me beautiful once. That was the first truth spoken to me without fear in years. Now you call me brilliant. Tell me, Cale Ardent, what else do you see when you look at me?" He drew breath, steady. "I see someone who could be more than a chain of blood and fear. Someone who could command not just obedience, but belief." Her lips parted as though to answer, but the chamber doors hissed open. An officer staggered in, gasping. "Majesty, Admiral Malvek requests parley. He has boarded with his honor guard." Lyra's cloak flared like fire. Her jagged smile was sharp enough to cut air. "Then let the teacher stand before the student." The hangar bay of the obsidian colossus was a cathedral of steel. Thousands of soldiers lined its edges as Malvek descended from his shuttle. He was massive even by Dominion standards, emerald armor dented, his gray skin dulled with age. His eyes were cold, calculating, the gaze of a man who had sculpted Lyra into a weapon. "Majesty," he said, bowing shallowly. Poison clung to the word. "I came as soon as I heard. I am ready to advise you on proper retaliation." Cale clenched his fists. The gall was staggering. Lyra's voice was velvet and venom. "You presume much, old master. But speak. Tell me what I must do." Malvek stepped to the holomap, every movement rehearsed. "The only path is the true path. Strike their colonies. Burn their fleets. Crush them until even ash fears your name. That is the way of strength. That is the Dominion." A ripple of assent passed through the soldiers. Fear-born loyalty still lingered in their bones. Cale's voice, quieter, slipped through the stillness. "How convenient." Malvek's head whipped toward him. His lip curled. "And what is this?" "A pet you've adopted, Majesty. A human insect whispering lies." The chamber hissed with insult. Yet Lyra did not flinch. "Commander Ardent," she said evenly, her words echoing, "has offered insights of greater worth than some who have served me a lifetime." Gasps cut through the crowd. Malvek's composure cracked. Lyra raised her colossal hand. The map flared to life, Confederacy fleets arrayed in formation, blockades holding strong. But then the projection shifted. Vibrant signals blossomed. Communications restored. Supply lines flickered back into being. The blockades crumbled. Malvek staggered. "Impossible." Cale folded his arms. "Not impossible. Just elegant." Whispers surged like a rising tide. Soldiers glanced between their Empress and her former mentor. Lyra summoned the transmission logs, flooding the air with damning evidence, encrypted messages, deployment leaks, betrayal traced like a web across the stars. "You fed them my doctrine," she said, her voice low and deadly. You forged me into a hammer, and thought I was bound to your lessons. But I am no longer your weapon. I am my own storm. Guards surged forward, shackling the old admiral. Malvek roared, his voice like stone shattering. Majesty, fear is the only chain strong enough to rule. Kale stepped forward, his voice like steel drawn in silence. No. Fear breaks. Belief endures. They'll follow her not because they fear her, but because they trust her brilliance. The hangar held its breath. Lyra's gaze burned into Kale for one dangerous heartbeat before she turned back to her old master. You betrayed me. You betrayed the Dominion. Worst of all, you betrayed its future. Remove him. The chains dragged Malvek into the shadows. His roars echoed like thunder cracking apart. But the danger was not ended. Saboteurs, loyal to Malvek's doctrine, still crept through the veins of the Colossus. When the rebellion struck, it came like knives in the dark. Explosions thundered through the ship. Alarms screamed. Smoke filled the corridors. Kale awoke to chaos. Barefoot, coughing, he stumbled through the haze, dodging assassins armed with plasma blades. Instinct dragged him toward the command spire. When he burst inside, the sight seared itself into his soul. Lyra stood at the center, her cloak torn, her colossal frame bathed in firelight. In her hand, a blade longer than Kale was tall blazed like lightning. Each swing cleaved rebels apart. Her amber eyes burned, her voice shook the chamber. They think to cut the crown from its throne. Kale seized a fallen rifle. His shots were clumsy, but desperate, covering her flank. He was no soldier, but that night he fought as though his life, and hers, depended on it. Together, giantess and human carved through the tide until silence fell, the spire littered with the fallen. Breathing hard, Lyra turned, her gray skin streaked with blood and soot. Her chest rose and fell like thunder drums. You saved my life, she said simply. Kale's lips tugged into a reckless grin. Consider it a compliment. For the first time, she laughed. Low, dangerous, alive. The aftermath of the sabotage burned like a scar across the Dominion. The wreckage was displayed in the war hall, a grim reminder of betrayal that still festered. Empress Lyra Draxon stood before her legions, her crimson cloak sweeping across the stone floor. The light caught her gray skin, polished like moonlight, and her fiery hair spilled over her shoulders in waves of red flame. They sought to end me, her voice rolled through the chamber like a storm. They sought to drag us back into chains of fear. But they have revealed themselves instead, weak, desperate, clinging to shadows. We march forward, not backward. Not with terror. With brilliance. Her words shook the pillars. Some soldiers dropped to one knee instantly, voices rising in thunderous loyalty. Others hesitated, eyes shifting, torn between the familiar certainty of fear and the dangerous new promise of belief. Kale Ardent stepped forward, dwarfed beside her, but steady. His voice carried clear despite its softer pitch. You've seen her outthink enemies who thought her predictable. You've seen her bleed to keep you whole. She doesn't ask for your fear anymore, she asks for your strength. Do you dare give it? The silence cracked. One by one, soldiers bent the knee until the hull thundered with vows. Not to fear. To her. Later, in the quiet of her chambers, Lyra leaned against the throne, her crown discarded. For once, she looked less like a goddess of war and more like a woman burdened by a crown that weighed like stone. You've given me more than strategy, human, she said low, almost weary. You've given me hope. Kale met her eyes, unflinching. Hope is stronger than chains. But the galaxy was not finished testing them. The Confederacy, humiliated, rallied. Lesser empires bound by desperation stitched their banners into a coalition. Their fleet was vast, larger than anything seen in centuries. It gathered at the Dominion's borders, bent on crushing Lyra before her vision could take root. On the Colossus bridge, holographic maps blazed. Enemy fleets filled the stars like a storm. General Thrwn snarled, tusks gleaming. They mean to end you here, Majesty. We must strike with everything. Overwhelm them before they breach our borders. Kale studied the projection, pulse hammering, but voice steady. Majesty, that's what they want. They want you shattered in open battle. If you fall, the Dominion falls back into fear. Lyra's burning gaze shifted to him. Then what do you suggest? He drew breath. Don't give them a battlefield. Give them a stage. Sow fractures. Let them believe you are everywhere and nowhere until they turn on each other. The chamber held its breath. Then slowly, dangerously, Lyra smiled. Yes. Their bond was forged by fear. And fear cannot endure brilliance. Prepare the deception campaigns. Chaos bloomed across the stars. The coalition tore itself apart under phantom orders, false transmissions, and whispers of betrayal. Old rivalries reignited. Fleets turned on one another. Supply lines collapsed. From the Colossus, Lyra watched, her massive hand curling into a fist. Look, she murmured. They are breaking themselves. Kale exhaled. You made them eat their own chains. General Thrwn stared at the chaos, tusks bared. His voice cracked with reluctant awe. This is not war. This is art. When Lyra finally unleashed her fleets, they struck like lightning, swift, precise, devastating. The coalition crumbled. The Confederacy fractured. The galaxy reeled, not at her wrath, but at her brilliance. But victory brought a new test. On Varys Prime, the Dominion's jewel world, Lyra convened her council. The great hall thundered with banners, voices torn between praise and outrage. Some hailed her as visionary. Others whispered treachery, furious she had heeded a human. The Empress rose to her full height, the hall drowning beneath her shadow. Once, I ruled with fear. But fear corrodes. Fear breaks. Today we stand victorious because we dared to evolve. Because we dared to believe. She lifted her colossal hand. This human spoke truth when none else dared. He saw not a tyrant, but a woman capable of more. For that, I name him not pet, not advisor, but partner. The chamber erupted, some in cheers, others in fury. But none dared deny her decree. Later, in the silence of her private chamber, she set her crown aside. Kale entered quietly. The firelight danced across his face. They looked at you with belief today, he said softly. Lyra's amber gaze flickered, unsettled. And it terrifies me more than any war. Tell me, Kale Ardent, do you still believe now that all the galaxy questions it? He stepped forward, taking her massive hand between his own. He pressed his lips to her knuckles. I don't believe in the crown. I believe in you. Her fiery hair spilled around them as she lifted him carefully, cradling him in one massive hand. Her voice trembled. No one has ever dared see me this way, not as a weapon, not as a storm. Just Lyra. Kale's heart thundered, but his smile was steady. Then let me be the one who always does. Her amber eyes softened, not with pity, not with cruelty, but with something fragile and dangerous. She lowered him against her chest, the steady beat of her heart thundering like drums of war. For the first time in her reign, she allowed herself to believe she was not alone. Years passed. The Dominion flourished not through conquest, but through treaties. Fear no longer bent spines, respect lifted them. At the heart of it stood the Empress and her human consort. Together they reshaped the galaxy. On quiet nights aboard the Colossus, Lyra would stand at the viewport, stars spilling endlessly beyond. She would lower her massive hand, and Kale would entwine his fingers with hers. Do you regret it? He asked once. letting me live that day. Her fiery hair framed her face as she looked down at him. I regret nothing. For in choosing you, Kale Ardent, I chose more than survival. I chose a future. The galaxy remembered her as conqueror, visionary, storm. But Kale knew her in ways no chronicler ever could, the laughter that rumbled low in her chest when he teased her, the quiet in her eyes when her armor fell away. Their love was improbable, impossible. Yet it was real, tempered in brilliance, born in belief. One night, as the stars wheeled beyond the viewport, Lyra lifted him close, her amber gaze softened by something no legend could capture. You called me beautiful, she whispered. And it changed everything. Kale touched her cheek with both hands. And I'll keep saying it for as long as you let me. Her lips brushed against him, no crown, no war, only two souls who had fought their way to one another. And in that moment, the most feared woman in the galaxy became something greater, not because of conquest, but because for the first time, she was truly seen. Together, they stood at the edge of eternity. So that was the story of Kale Ardent, the reckless envoy who dared to speak the forbidden truth, and Empress Lyra Draxon, the giantess sovereign who turned chains of fear into a future built on belief. Their journey began with a single word, beautiful. A word so dangerous it should have killed him, yet instead reshaped the destiny of empires. We watched as Lyra was tested by betrayal, rebellion, and a galaxy-wide coalition intent on breaking her. But every time, Kale's reckless honesty challenged her to see beyond the chains of her past. He showed her that fear breaks, but belief endures. And in the end, she was not only feared as the Grey Sovereign, she was remembered as a visionary who transformed an empire. And at her side was Kale, proof that even the smallest voice can redirect the storms of history. Their bond was impossible, improbable, yet undeniable, a human and a giantess, bound not by fear, but by love and truth. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget. Your support keeps these tales alive. Give this video a like if you want to see more stories of humans defying the impossible. Hit subscribe so you never miss the next galactic saga. And share this video with someone who loves daring adventures across the stars. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and never be afraid to speak the truth.